Hello everybody, this is an ongoing series examining the dungeon design in Zelda games. If you're interested, feel free to check out the previous videos in this series, but otherwise, let's hop into it. Before we get to the dungeon itself, there's a bit to discuss with the Wind Waker. I know that for the videos on the N64 titles, that I made this whole big deal out of recording off of an actual N64, but I'm going to go back on that now. For this series, I will be playing through Wind Waker HD. The reason for that is that I truly believe that this is the definitive version of the game. The visuals are polished up, like the N64 to 3DS remakes, but it mostly retains its same visual identity and style. It's more of an upscaling of the original version than the 3DS games, which were pretty significant overhauls in many ways. And although I think the bloom effects are a bit too heavy at certain points, I still think Wind Waker overall looks wonderful in HD. The music also gets a great overhaul. They took all of the original MIDI arrangements and gave it a full orchestrated treatment, which gives the tracks a much more impressive depth to its sound. Another reason I think this version translates so much better to a new platform is the controls. By this, I mean that the N64 Zelda games were clearly designed around the N64 controller, which has 6 face buttons. When moving this over to the 3DS, you now have only 4 face buttons to work with instead, so some compromises had to be made. And I feel like that makes certain aspects of those games a bit awkward, especially when it comes to playing the ocarina itself. Meanwhile, Wind Waker was designed around the GameCube controller, and though the button shapes differ a little bit, the Wii U controller is a pretty straightforward transition. There are the same amount of face buttons, 2 sticks, a D-pad, etc. In fact, they now have additional buttons with ZL and Select to work with. And that's not even counting the gamepad's touchscreen. And yes, I am well aware that the 3DS has a touchscreen and gyro aim, and that it's used in pretty much the same way as here, but truthfully, you can just as easily play Wind Waker HD with a Wii U Pro controller, and you'd pretty much get the same experience that you would get on the GameCube controller-wise. Maybe this all sounds hypocritical to you, but I just feel like the changes made to this game feel far less intrusive and more like enhancements than the changes made to those ones. Another quick note, I am playing this on New Game Plus mode because I love Link's outfit. I'm also playing this on Hero mode because I'm some sort of video game masochist. That said, these things won't get in the way of examining the dungeon design, so not to worry. Anyway, something I've always loved about Wind Waker is how intrinsically it feels like a true sequel. Where Majora's Mask has always been Link, the Hero of Time's story, a personal sequel from the perspective of that character, this game is the sequel from the perspective of Hyrule, the world that Link left behind. This is the aftermath that the world has had to endure starting from this moment. Timeline splits and all that, you know. So as we hear the legend in this game's opening, we are told of how the hero appeared, defeated Ganon, and became a legend. But when Ganon resurfaced, he was nowhere to be found. So what became of that kingdom? None remain who know. Okay, so the game kicks off as Errol, Link's sister, wakes him up. This is Outset Island, Link's hometown. I love how cozy this island is. Errol tells us that our grandma is looking for us, and so we are off to see her. There's a handful of NPCs you can interact with here if you want some hints on controls and such, but if you want, you can just as easily pass them by, which in my honest opinion, seems like the best way to do a tutorial section. Easy for new players, and easy for returning players. Something great I should mention is, boy, can Link move in this game. Wind Waker Link is a lot more nimble than his N64 counterpart. His overall speed is slightly increased, and there's far less of a delay after rolling, making his movement just smoother overall. As I've been playing this as well, I've noticed a sprinkling of ideas implemented here that seem to really pave the way for Breath of the Wild in many ways, but we'll come back to that in later videos. Okay, so seeing Grandma, she gives us the green tunic, or well, she usually does if you're not on New Game Plus, and she mentions the decorative family shield hanging on the wall, but that that the island life here is a peaceful one, with only one resident knowing the ways of the sword. She asks you to fetch your sister, so back you go. When you talk to Errol again, she'll give you the telescope as a birthday present and suggest you try it out since you're at a great vantage point already. Looking around the island, we'll see the Rito postman panic, which triggers this cutscene. A giant bird clutching a young girl flies over the island, being pursued by pirates. They manage to strike the bird, who drops the girl into the forest on the summit of the island. Errol suggests you go help her, but that it could be dangerous and you should find a weapon to defend yourself with. You can visit Orca here to get your sword, as hinted at by your grandma earlier, and he'll give you a quick sword tutorial, which I'm personally not a big fan of because I'd rather just learn by doing. But sure, once we have the sword, we can take the path up the mountain, cross the bridge, and head into the forest. There's a handful of bokoblins to fight, but overall there isn't too much going on here. It does give us a good handle on learning to climb and jump though. We'll find that girl that was dropped here. This is Tetra, who is kind of important, by the way. One of the pirates also made his way up here, so you all head out together. But as you do, yeah, the bird came back, but this time he grabbed Errol. Long story short, Link now wants to go rescue his sister. The postman convinces the pirates to take you to pursue the bird, which Tetra agrees to on the condition that you are properly equipped. You get that shield from Grandma and set off with the pirates. Emotional goodbye, sassy dialogue, this is all good stuff. While sailing, there is a quick segment where the game is again being a bit heavy-handed with its tutorial, but you can go through this quick obstacle course and Nico here will give you the spoils bag, which basically lets you collect materials that enemies drop. By the way, I just want to address something about all of this. Way back in my very first Ocarina of Time video, I had praised that game's opening section for not making you do too much in the way of what I called chores before the game's dungeon. I cited Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess, and The Wind Waker as examples of games that do that, and there was a bit of backlash from people defending Wind Waker, and I get that. It's not always bad to make you have to do stuff before the dungeons, especially for pacing reasons, but this tutorial stuff is exactly what I meant when I said the game made us do our chores first. Go talk to Grandma, go talk to your sister, go get your sword, go get your shield, go jump here, swing on that rope, etc. It's not too bad in this game in my opinion. Of those 3 titles I name dropped, this game gets it the most right, and as unintrusive overall as this introduction and tutorial section is, I do still see it as foreshadowing of a trend later games in the series would follow. It's also definitely a lot more heavy-handed a tutorial than the N64 games, but at least everything that happens here still works to propel the story forward. You know, unlike this. So anyways, I can forgive all this. Anyhow, the pirate ship arrives at the Forsaken Fortress where the giant bird sits at the top. Tetra points out to you that the central tower of the fortress seems to be where Errol is kept prisoner, since it's surrounded by seagulls. However, since the fortress has all of these searchlights, it'll be impossible for the pirate ship to approach. So instead, she decides to send Link in alone by launching him in a barrel, right into the heart of the Forsaken Fortress. Oof. So the impact from the launch disarms Link, which presents a bit of a problem. We land down in the water at essentially the loading docks of the fortress. But let's talk about the fortress itself for a moment. I almost didn't dedicate an entire video to this place because there seems to be some debate as to whether this is truly the game's first dungeon or not. It seems like it at a glance, but spoilers, we don't actually finish the dungeon during our first visit here. That said, I think there's enough to talk about story and mechanics wise to separate it from the rest, and I think it works really well as an interesting starter dungeon. As far as the layout goes, the entire dungeon is like a large pentagon. The middle section is a large open plaza or courtyard, and the interior is a collection of small 2-story rooms with adjoining corridors, which makes up the fortress walls, except for the main tower, which extends even higher up. Architecture-wise, there's not too much to tell. It looks like there's a ship nestled on top of it somehow, but aside from that, it's just a stone fortress. It's probably the least visually interesting in this game on its own, but the story and atmosphere compensate for that. I do have to offer kudos to how well the layout and design do feel like a real fortress, however. Aside from the excessive amount of corridors, the rooms all feel like they have purpose, as if they were actual parts of a fortress that could be operational, including this docking room, barracks, prison, and even a kitchen. Regarding its music, it does its job here as far as ambience goes. There's almost something of a militant marching feel to it. This is not a standout track to me, but it does the job well enough. The progression here is what really sets this dungeon apart from any others in the game. We're unarmed for the majority of our visit here, so even the simplest enemies such as bokoblins pose a serious threat. Therefore, the dungeon is basically like a big stealth mission. As Tetra pointed out, Errol is in the main tower of the fortress, but to get to it, you'll need to disable the searchlights around the fortress. Oh, also Tetra slipped you this magical stone to communicate with, and it's pretty cool. So we start down here at the loading dock. To sneak around, you can hide under one of these barrels. You'll want to make your way up these stairs to the main plaza area and up the next set of stairs. Or you can just get caught. That sounds counterintuitive, but as far as the progression is designed here, it's totally not a setback at the start, which is great because it's a very real possibility for new players to get caught by accident. Either way, if you follow the stairs up or get caught, you'll end up over here in the fortress prison. It's easy enough to escape from the cell here by crawling through this space, but either way, make sure to nab yourself the map from this treasure chest here. From here, the floor plan is pretty well open, so the progression isn't strictly linear. You'll have to disable all 3 searchlights. You'll probably end up doing this one first due to its proximity to the prison, but you don't have to. Since you're unarmed, Tetra will give you a hint to try to use your shield and disarm the bokoblin operating the searchlight, though it's just as easy to duck around and grab a pot to break over his head. Then you can grab a stick to use as a weapon. Aside from that, it's free open exploration at its best here. Make sure you nab the compass from this chest located here in the far eastern room. There's a couple of goodies to find by exploring all of these rooms actually, including a heart piece in the southeasternmost room. The second searchlight can be disabled right after grabbing the compass. You can cross this room, pass through the door, and climb this ladder. Easy enough. The third one is not as obvious, however, since the ladder up to it appears to be out of reach. There's a second ladder on the back side of the platform, however, which you can find by crossing through the barracks room on the second floor. Once you've done that and disabled all 3 of the searchlights, the layout sort of naturally funnels you upwards towards the main tower. Interestingly, it's actually designed in such a way that this room is naturally able to be reached from either direction, making this a logical point to converge upon. It's a bit tricky to do, but once you sneak past the moblins and go through the door, you'll find yourself on the outside path, which wraps around the exterior of the main tower. The game offers a bit of forgiveness as you learn to sidle along the ledge here, so if you fall, don't worry, there's a ladder to climb back up. Once you cross here and follow the path up, then you'll reach this door. Here is where your sword actually landed before, so you can grab it quickly, but then you'll also be locked into combat against this green bokoblin. He's not too tough to deal with now that we have our sword back. In fact, you can do an awful lot of just standing around here, so as far as mid-bosses go, he's a breeze. But hey, this is also the very start of the game, so let's cut Green Boko here some slack, hey? Once we defeat him, we can enter this room where we'll find Errol being kept prisoner. We won't even have time to free her before being confronted by the dungeon boss. Except we don't really get to fight him. As soon as he shows up, he grabs us and carries us outside. We'll see a quick glimpse of a shadowy figure who commands the bird, and we are literally tossed aside out into the ocean. And that's it for the dungeon. No success, no epic boss battle, no sister rescued. Just failure. But remember, this is to serve the story better. Link's failure now makes victory later all the better. So that's the dungeon. Overall, while it's contested as to whether this even counts fully as the first dungeon, I still believe Forsaken Fortress works super well as an introduction to this game. We are made to learn mechanics that weren't in prior games, such as sneaking, crawling, and sidling, but also the story is set up for us in a way that is really engaging. I might have some slight bias towards this, however. I spent a lot of time playing this as part of the Wind Waker demo on the GameCube Collector's Disc back in the day, before I even owned the game, and I was pretty enamored with it back then. Of course, I do have some nitpicks. This cutscene makes no sense in regards to its physical space. If Link is launched and hits that main tower, then falls straight down, he he shouldn't land in the water on the opposite side of this huge open courtyard. But honestly, this game is almost 20 years old, and I only ever noticed it just now while writing this video, so I guess that's pretty minor. A lot of these corridors also look a bit too samey for me, and I think that without the map and compass, it's pretty easy to get mixed up or to accidentally retread a room you've already been in. There are maps plastered on the walls and these signposts to alleviate that a bit, but it would have been nicer if the rooms were a bit more visually distinct from each other. Final gripe, but spoiler alert, that's Ganondorf, and it's just too obvious in the HD version. I know we learn about it pretty much immediately after, but on the GameCube original, the lower resolution left a lot of this detail obscured, and in the HD version, you can see him so clearly, which undercuts some of the mystery. But that's pretty much all there is to tell. It's a much shorter episode today, but hey, not every dungeon is going to be the Forest Temple or Stone Tower. And the pacing of Wind Waker is also a pretty wonderful shakeup from the previous two games. The Forsaken Fortress does a wonderful job easing us into it all. While the game's best stuff is still to come, I still think it's pretty darn good. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for when the next one comes out. Just want to take a quick moment to say thank you to the lovely people who supported me on Patreon. In particular, those who supported at the cheese tier or higher, which includes Tetra, Brenda, Callie, Justin, and Finley. Thank you so much, you guys, for the support, and I will catch you all next time. Bye bye!